Hello and welcome back to the Zag Talk podcast. I'm Brian here with just Carson today, no Dylan, but that's all right. We're going to have a lively discussion here on Kraziness in the Kennel, some unfortunate news around Dom, and then some additional news around the Mark Few suspension. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Over this last weekend, the Zags took on the Zags in Kraziness in the Kennel. It was a real barn burner. The game actually ended in a 38-38 tie in 15 minutes. Lots of up and down play, not much defense, with the exception of a few highlight reel blocks from a few different guys, which was kind of cool to see. Just a few statistical highlights. Julian Strother, he had a game-high 11 points, 5 of 9 shooting, 1 of 3 from the three-point line. He also had 5 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block. So I think the consensus is that he was the MVP of Kraziness without a doubt. He showed that he is ready for prime time after a year of kind of being stuck behind some NBA players, including Corey Kispert and Joel Ayayi. Beyond that, there's a lot more to cover. Andrew Nembhard for the Navy squad, he really showed that he was, a total leader. He knocked down 2 threes over the course of the 15-minute game, 3 assists as well. And so I think he just showed that he is ready for that prime time lead guard role. One other guy that really showed out for me was Ben Gregg. He actually hit a borderline buzzer beater to tie the game up. And he just showed that he did his thing over the summer in terms of preparing. So I think that he outperformed a lot of people's expectations, which was cool. Beyond that, the guys that we would expect to do really well did fine. I mean, Drew Timme, 7 points, 7 points and assists, and I believe he had a block as well. Chet Holmgren, 6 points on 3 of 6 shooting, missed both of his 3-point attempts, but he definitely made an impact in the game. And overall, it was just cool to see the guys out there. I mean, it had been, I think, a long summer of just waiting to see how all these pieces would fit together. And we got some answers. I mean, you can only glean so much from a scrimmage like that. And the last thing I'll say there is, if you want a little bit more detail around how it all went, who played well, what to expect this season, then go check out my article at zagaholic.net. We'll put a link in the show notes. Overall, it was really, really awesome to see the guys back out there. All right, on to another unfortunate piece of news. Carson, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so along with some of the exciting stuff from Kraziness in the Kennel last weekend, we had some less than great news come in about Dom Harris and his foot. I think a couple weeks ago we had seen some pictures from his Twitter, Instagram, showing that he was in a boot, but it originally sounded like it was going to be a pretty quick thing and that it wouldn't keep him out for long. It turns out after some second opinions that he is actually going to be having surgery on a torn plantar fascia, which sounds like maybe my second worst nightmare in terms of injury. Outside of knees have always been the bad one for me, but doesn't sound comfortable. I think I saw somebody had tweeted that the usual recovery for that is 6 to 10 weeks. It's also sounded like it might be a season-long thing, depending on when he gets back. So that's definitely a bummer for him because we know it's been such a big off-season in terms of the competition for the backcourt, and was hoping to compete to get some solid minutes back there. If it's going to be a spot on the team, I think that's probably the place that we can handle a loss in terms of depth. But again, we'll miss his shooting. It sounds like he was having a pretty good offseason shooting wise. And then obviously his defense is a big piece for us too, because who knows what the defense is going to look like this year on the perimeter anyway. So yeah, it's just a bummer. He worked so hard and sucks to have that happen a week before the season really starts, with Kraziness and getting kicked off there.
Yeah. He seemed ready just based on his social media posts and stuff. And that's what sucks the most, I really feel for him.
Yeah. I think from what we were hearing, he was probably maybe to the middle to the back part of that guard bunch, but was still going to be getting solid minutes. And obviously, when you have guys grouped in like that at the beginning of the year, you have a lot. I mean, you can show out early in the season in some of those big games and be a huge piece to the team. So that's just a bummer to put in all that work and then have it cut short. But we know Dom's going to be here and be around and be a good guy on the bench, and to just atmosphere wise for the culture of the team will be good to have around. So hopefully he can get back this season and add a little depth by the end of the year, but it is what it is at this point. Another thing with this though, during Craziness, we had Anthony Black, one of our, I guess now our priority recruit, um, in the 2023 class, who's a 6'7" guard, really is skyrocketed up the rankings and kind of the attention of in the recruiting world over the summer and over the last year. And turns out that he's actually been ruled ineligible by the Texas board, whoever it is, that he transferred, and they said it was for sport reasons, because that's what every single high school student transfers for when they're playing sports. So caught him on that, and sounds like he might not be able to play this year for his senior year in high school down in Texas. So he's appealing it, but it sounds like there's some conversations around, and obviously with every team now that he's being recruited by, about potentially pulling maybe a Ben Gregg type of situation where he, graduates early if that's possible for him, reclassifies, and is able to join the team for a second semester. So he'd be joining right after, Thanksgiving, Christmas break kind of time. And probably wouldn't be a part of this team in terms of playtime, but we've seen with Gregg just what that means to have that extra 6 to 8 months of development and get with the team. And you got Nemhard there now and some good veteran guys that could really be huge for the future of the program. So a lot of moving parts there, and I think he plans to make his decision soon. So that could be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and in terms of the timeline, I just quickly look back at how Ben Gregg went through his whole process. He committed in early September, and by December 17th, he was basically enrolled in school, or it was announced that he had been allowed to come on campus and join the team. So we probably won't know for a while. As you said, a lot of moving parts. But we'll see. It's potentially a really exciting development. And, if Craziness is any indication, having a guy on campus just for a semester or the back half of the season really, really does make a huge impact on his ability to improve quickly, which, based on Ben Gregg's performance at Craziness, and again, it's only a 15-minute scrimmage, but I really do think that could make a huge impact in terms of getting a guy ready for a full college basketball season.
Yeah, and I don't know what level his high school is or the one that he was transferring to is, but just from some experience, just a college weightlifting program, nutrition program, being in the gym with Division I athletes every single day, because I don't think that he was going to a prep school. I think it was just another school, if I'm not mistaken. So, that's a huge, huge difference and a huge advantage for a guy to be able to come in and, for someone like him, the extra using that year of eligibility. I guess they could still redshirt him. I don't know how that works, but even if he had to use it and it was his freshman year, besides maybe an ego situation where, you don't want to be a sophomore instead of a freshman, I don't think it really matters at all. The guy's, you would assume he is going to go to the league and he's that type of caliber of player. So it seems like it would be a great deal wherever he ends up going, hopefully Gonzaga, for him to get in there early and get to work.
He was trying to transfer to Duncanville. It's not a prep school, but they happen to have 2 players in the top 50 in the 2023 class. And I believe they have a few guys around Anthony Black in the 2022 class too. So, it's, that I think that's what probably makes it questionable. If he was transferring to like an IMG Academy or something, like probably not a big deal. But
yeah, but what's the difference between that school and Rainier Beach or Garfield up in Seattle, or even Eastside Catholic? Some of the times we know. I played for their old coach in AAU, and he was, that's about as bad of a history
Yeah.
as you can get in terms of,
Yeah.
some sketchy stuff going on. So I mean, it is what high school sports is at this point. And they make
Yeah.
rules. It's just interesting to actually see them go after somebody, because that seems fairly rare.
I'm curious to know if the Texas, interscholastic, whatever, their board thing is more strict than Washington's, because it seems like WIAA has been up and down. Like the Tony Roten situation was weird back in the day when he had to go to Renton for a quarter and then play on the JV team. The whole thing was weird,
Yeah, I
but it
mean,
seems like they've
I
been
played with
super
guys in high
relaxed.
school that transferred 3 times, 4 times. I mean, I know of people who have gone to 4 different schools, 4 different years. And I know people move around a lot, but that it seems somewhat convenient. But yeah, I mean, I know guys that were, started, I mean, Clover Park, and then went to uh, Rainier Beach or Garfield, or maybe another school in between. I know a couple of people who went, Sam Cunliffe went from Blanchette to one of the Federal Way schools to Rainier Beach, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
Yep.
and I know they're not
Yeah.
moving around because they had other kids going to Decatur in different schools. So that's a
Yeah.
whole other WIAA tangent that we could get into
that's
another
a topic
time.
for another
But
podcast. Yeah.
yeah.
Jeez.
All right. Well, other news before we hop into our segment of that we've been kind of doing with different players for questions in the upcoming year. Mark Few, the suspension has been announced. That came out, I think, right before Craziness. It'll be a total of 3 games plus Craziness. From a PR perspective, maybe not the smartest move, because 2 of those games are exhibitions. So it's being reported as a 1-game suspension. So, I mean, we're not going to get too much into that. I think we talked about it pretty extensively on the last episode, just, our thoughts on it and what some of the motivations may or may not have been for getting him back by a certain point. But it is what it is now. He still has the legal side of it to go through. But yeah, so
Yeah.
he'll be back for the Texas game. He'll miss 2 exhibitions and the first game of the season.
The optics could not be worse. And the recruits that take their official visits for the Texas game, they better be damn good players. Okay. Anyway, yeah, we should just move on. I'm going to get worked up.
All right. So our 3 players for this week, pull them out of a jar. Last episode, if you don't remember, we had Nolan Hickman, Julian Strother, and Rozier Bolton. So this week we have about 9 guys, I think, if we're taking Dom out, 8 guys if we're taking Dom out, I think. Is that right, Brian? Math.
I believe so.
I just finished a day of work with a lot of maths. So
Yep.
this week we have Caden Perry, Andrew Nembhard, and Chet Holmgren. So
Love it.
We'll start with Caden Perry. Biggest question for him, Brian, is will he be able to carve out a role on this year's team?
I'm going to say yes. It'll be a minimal role. I think that it won't be a question of Ben Gregg and Caden Perry competing for minutes. I feel like each of those guys are going to be, brought into the game to play totally different roles. Caden Perry, not a guy who's going to be able to stretch the floor at all. Ben Gregg obviously is. Caden Perry is just a freak athlete who's a rim protector. If we need that in a game against a super athletic team, I would imagine we'd throw him in there for defense and just to be, a threat on the inside. He's got a long way to go in terms of his skill set. I think that he definitely needs to improve his ball handling. One thing that he did show at Craziness, though, is he's got such a high motor, and that alone will probably get him onto the floor. And so I think that he will be able to carve out a role. It won't be a substantial scoring role or anything. It'll primarily be we need a guy in there for rim protection who doesn't need to do much on the offensive end, but we really need him in there for defense. I think that'll kind of be his role. What do you think?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a little bit over the last week or so, and I think, and we talked about it a little bit last weekend when we were in Spokane, but I I think it might be a little bit like 2017 with Killian Tilly and Rui, where they played. I think they ended up averaging maybe like 10 minutes a game. It was a lot lower, I think, actually in conference, just because, the deeper we get into the season. Or no, it was higher, a couple minutes higher in conference than in the tournament, some of those bigger games. But you got someone like Tilly who's maybe a little more polished. I would maybe put that as Ben Gregg, who can also shoot it, step out. He's probably less of a shot blocker there, but and then you have Perry, who's maybe a little more raw, but is just a freak athletically. And I would say he's probably a little more polished than Rui was at that time. But I think they're guys who they'll probably get about 5 minutes a game. If one of them is, if it's a better situation for one of them, or one of them kind of carves out a role more, maybe they're getting 10. And that's not really anything about them that's causing that. That's more just because they have such good guys ahead of them. Because, you got obviously Timmy and Chet, and then you have Watson, who are going to eat up a lot of those minutes. And you think about 2017, where you had Shemek, and then J3, and then Zach Collins off the bench. So you kind of have the two older guys and then a freshman, maybe switch the roles around a little bit. But I, they'll get their chances. I think one of the things the last couple of years with our backup bigs that were deeper on the bench, like last year with Ballo, is he couldn't play defense. So as teams got used to him and could game plan, like you couldn't have him on the floor because other teams were going to go in and score immediately as much as they wanted. And I don't think that'll be an issue with either Perry or Gregg this year. Obviously not with Perry because he's a great rim protector. So having guys like him who can come in and give you a few minutes of good defense, you don't really need them to be studs offensively, even if they're picking up a few fouls. I think that's something that last year we didn't have when Timmy or Watson got in foul trouble. You really just had to throw. I mean, we started throwing Gregg out there last year over Ballo just because, Ballo obviously got hurt, but he was just a complete liability out there. So I think he'll have a role. I really don't think we're going to see one of them redshirt at this point, like we kind of thought originally, but it's going to be fun to see because the dude's a freak. So I think we'll see a couple maybe late garbage minute dunks on somebody's head and a couple really good blocks, and just see him flying around some freshman mistakes. Cause like you said, he has a motor, but he's sometimes just, you see something, you're like, whoa, that was a little out of control. But that's what you get with some freshmen who are just too athletic for their own good sometimes.
Yeah. And I think the red shirt is, I think it was talked about early on, but he's either going to be, he's not going to be a guy who would benefit from one redshirt year. I think he's going to be able to carve out, a much bigger role in 2 to 3 years, even without, having like one redshirt year under his belt. I mean, that's just my opinion. Like, I could be totally
and we also
wrong, but
there were some concerns originally about his back injury that he had at the tail end of the high school season. So we weren't really sure where he was with all of that, but he obviously looks fine. So
he almost dunked on Chet Holmgren's head. Like, come on, he's ready. So
all right, well, speaking of Chet, let's move on to him. My big question going in the year was how assertive will he be offensively from the jump? And that I started thinking about that question when I was watching some of him with Team USA over the summer at the U18, U19 tournament, whatever it was. You see this, Jalen was kind of the same way, where he wasn't always, he could, but he wasn't always forcing the issue and super aggressive right from the jump. And he kind of let things come to him. He would go long stretches in that tournament this summer without scoring. Obviously, he's making his mark and he's being felt in other ways in the game. But from a scoring perspective, he wasn't necessarily ultra aggressive trying to get his shot. And then it eventually come to him. He'd score 5, 7, 10 points in a row. And that's how he was getting. He still averaged like 13 points a game, I think. I'm not really sure how my guess is that he'll be maybe a little more passive offensively, especially at the start of games and in some of the big games. And that might need to be something that they eventually kind of start feeding him a little earlier, try to get him going. But again, we do have Drew Timme and Andrew Nembhard and what looks to be Strother as a reliable scorer or scorers for this year's team. So I don't know. What do you think? How do you think that's going to play out for him?
Yeah, to your point, he doesn't need to score a million points. I think if we get halfway through the season and he's averaging 10 points, we might look at that and say, well, that's maybe a little low. But if we look at the rest of the stat sheet and he's averaging, 10 rebounds, 5 blocks, 4 assists a game, like his contribution will be undeniable. In terms of his aggressiveness on the offensive end, I think we saw what we're probably going to see throughout the season at Kraziness, in that his most aggressive move to the basket was off of a fake dribble handoff, and his defender kind of bit and sort of overplayed a little bit, and then it was one dribble and he met Ben Gregg at the rim for just a layup over the guy. Really, really simple, impactful offensive play, right? Where he didn't do so well is when he kind of tried to force the issue, and he had a few turnovers where he kind of dribbled into 3 defenders in the middle of the key, and with quick guards like Hunter Salas and Andrew Nembhard, able to swipe in there, like it was a turnover. And so I think that as long as he plays how he did in the U19 FIBA, World Championships or whatever, lets the game come to him, isn't forcing the issue because he doesn't need to, and lets the game come to him, like that is probably going to be the best bet for him anyway. So in terms of like being aggressive, he doesn't need to be hyper aggressive in order to make a huge impact on the floor. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think it's a great, letting the game come to you the way that he does and not feeling, especially, you have this hype as the number 1 player in your class, potential number 1 draft pick, and then you get paired up with all these other great guys in your same age range, and sometimes there's so just you want to show out and you want to be like, hey, this is my team kind of thing, and that obviously carries over to college as well. But I'm hoping with some of the trust that he has in Timme and in Nemhard and the other guys on the team, that maybe that's less of a thing for him, because you start forcing it too much. I just don't want it to get to the point where Timmy's being doubled or has an off night and Nemhard isn't scoring or whatever, and then it's like, okay, crap, now you need to go do something else that you're not used to doing.
Yeah. I think Chet does have that killer instinct, and you see it in his high school highlights. When he needs to get shit done, he absolutely does it, and he has like a total disposition to dominate his opponents. And I think that would play a role as well if push came to shove and he did need to score a bunch of points. So
yeah, exactly. I think it's hard watching him sometimes because you're like, some people give him an odd amount of space on the perimeter, and he's a good shooter, but I don't think he likes to necessarily shoot it in volume from 3. So I'm interested to see what his 3-point attempts per game is going to be this year. Obviously he's going to have the green light, but I think he likes to kind of play with that, because once he starts hitting, people start closing out a little more, and then it's see you later.
Well, I think that kind of leads us to the next question, since we're talking about, if other guys are having off nights, is he able to step up? How will him and Drew Timme play together?
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one to see come together. And we know Timme historically has not played great with other more back to the basket bigs. If you think about Petrushev in the 2019-20 season, and even with Watson last year, the efficiency offensively comes down a little. Obviously, it was offset by Watson's contributions defensively. But yeah, he likes to have his space down there, and he likes to go to work, and it helps not having that double coming immediately. And that's why I think that having Chet there as well, who's not, his main game is not back to the basket. He can do it, But he's not a traditional, back you down in the post guy. So I think that'll help. Guys will have to respect his shooting ability and not just immediately crash down with the other big without some sort of backside rotation there. So it seems to be a great match, and I think he'll play great with Watson as well. But yeah, I'm not super concerned with the Timmy dynamic. I mean, it's going to take a little bit, spreading shots in a front court that's that loaded. I think that their games really match up well once they find what works with them and the spacing and start getting kind of the camaraderie there. That it's going to be great.
Yeah, I think what's hard is we already know how Timmy plays at the collegiate level. I think there's still a lot of question marks about how Chet will fare against 23-year-old men. Which is a little bit different than what he's used to playing at the high school level and just absolutely dominating guys. But I think, with that said, I think that in terms of how they'll play together and off of each other, I would assume that Mark Few would want them to play more of like, I don't know, kind of like more of a polished, athletic Kyle Wiltshire and Domantas Sabonis, where Drew Timme, his role is to carve out space inside, seal his guy when other dudes are driving to the basket, and Chet's job is to bring defenders away from the hoop and play on the perimeter. I think that the game has evolved even since those guys played together back in, what was it, 2015, 16. And I think my concern, if I have a concern at all, would be on the defensive end. Is Timmy going to be able to play defense on the perimeter? I mean, granted, the only teams that were able to figure out a way to kind of carve him up a little bit were BYU in the first half of that conference tournament game when Alex Barcelo and some other guys were able to just take advantage of that switch, and then Baylor, which, potentially the best the best 3-guard lineup in the history of college basketball. So that's not to say that Drew Timmy's, ball screen defense was bad. It's just he got exposed. So does he have that in his game this year? If so, and we can switch 1 through 5, I think that's probably the best case scenario, because I think Chet, he can kind of sag off of guys, even if they're shooters. He can still close out and get a good hand up and then recover and block shots at the rim. So, I think that's more my question is, in terms of them playing together, is can Drew Timme, switch on the perimeter?
Yeah. And I am excited this year because I think one of the things that changes that dynamic a little bit is at the time, I mean, last year we know we did not really have any elite rim protectors. This year we do with Chet. But they're pulling out the one guy who was our biggest guy on the court and attacking, and then who do you have there to help? You have Kispert, maybe Watson if he's in at the same time. Like, you just didn't have anybody great there. And sure, you could be, if you're pulling Timmy out into high pick and rolls, and then you have Chet in help, like probably going to be pulling up for a lot of mid-range jump shots, which BYU did against us, but he can still affect that shot. But what you don't want is him being put in some bad situations where he's having to recover late back to another guy as they dump it off and he's getting in foul trouble. But again, I think just having Chet there will help kind of ease that burden for Timmy. I assume he's still made steps in that area, but it'll kind of change the dynamic there. But I am excited on the offensive end to have kind of the Josh Perkins, Sabonis, Karnowski era. They like to do that pick and roll and then have the other big who's not setting the pick sealing off. I mean, it's pretty much a moving screen when you don't feed the guy, but they're posting up there while the pick and roll is happening. You can feed them, or you're just creating a lane to go to the hoop. And I would love, have Chet on the pick and roll, Timmy down low, sealing off there. Give it to Timmy, Chet pops, you can get him there, or you're going to have like Nemhard or one of our guards having a nice open lane or a pull-up jumper. So there's going to just be so many fun options to watch offensively for us this year. And I think even the high-low, we could see that come back a little bit. I feel like we haven't seen it as much the last few years, as much as we did, at least when we were there in school, when it was the big passing show between Sabonis and Karnowski, and Wilcher and Sabonis, and Wilcher and Karnowski. So it's just going to be fun to
Yeah.
watch this year offensively for sure.
Yeah, I think Chet in a way was kind of the missing complementary piece to Timmy's game. So that'll be really cool to see, I think.
All right, last guy, we got Andrew Nembhard. Our question there is he ready and or capable of being a consistent 3-point and scoring threat? So last year, some stats for Nemhard. He averaged 9.2 points per game, 48% field goal percentage, 32.3% from three. He shot 37.5% from three in conference, but fell to 30.8% in the tournament, or both tournaments. It's going to be interesting this year because we're definitely going to rely on him to score from the perimeter. He's kind of the one guy that you have penciled in as don't really have to think about it. But we know for this team, one of the big questions is 3-point shooting. Do we have enough to where teams aren't going to be able to kind of sag off and help inside against Timmy and Chet if he's trying to drive and just help against our drivers? So we saw in the 3-point competition at Kraziness, the stroke looks good. He started getting going, as he said, in conference, was shooting at a much higher clip, around 38%. So it seems like it's going to be there. I think maybe the big thing for him this year is that he's going to be getting shots at maybe a little bit different spots and different looks and in different rhythms. Last year, he got a lot of his threes when he started knocking them down from the corner on kickouts from drives or from Timmy. And this year, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot more. We've seen him shoot threes and score off the dribble. And we saw, his late three against UCLA. We saw it a little bit in Kraziness. Last year, he was pretty aggressive off the dribble. And then obviously at Florida, that was a lot of what he did in their offense. So I think just finding a balance between the spot ups, which he's still going to get, and being able to score off the dribble will be huge for us if he's able to score that at a semi-efficient clip. If he's able to be in the upper 30s, maybe get to 40, lower 40s, that'll be huge for us, having our point guard being able to score in multiple ways that way. And in terms of scoring consistency, I think I'm less concerned about that just because last year we had so many other established options by the time that he was really coming in and becoming a starter. And we saw him step up and score when we really needed him to, like in the West Virginia game. And he's really crafty and can find ways to score. I just don't think he really needed to. And he's a smart player and knew he didn't need to force anything or try to take anything over, which I think we saw a little bit at Kraziness last year. He was pretty aggressive and getting his own shot and everything. So I think the scoring consistency will be there, and I think that'll be somebody that we lean on a lot in our backcourt to get a lot of those points, especially with some of the younger guys. And then obviously we'll have Strother back there too to help out. But I'm really thinking that he'll be able to shoot a little more like he did in conference last year from outside, and maybe get a few more looks as well. But he's really going to be able to hone in more of a consistent scoring this year.
Yeah, I mean, agree with everything you said. And just watching him at Kraziness, I mean, we all know what he's capable of. I mean, when we had to rely on him to kind of take over the game a little bit against like West Virginia, for example, last year, or against Creighton. I mean, like we know what he's capable of. He can get to the teeth of the defense, and he figures out a way to either make the right play or get up a really good shot. I think that there was something just different about the way that he played at Kraziness. I can't quite put my finger on it. It seemed like he was just, I don't know. He had that killer instinct. It's clear that, the coaching staff has kind of talked to him about like, hey, look, we're going to need you to sort of be a leader on this team. We know you are trying to get to the next level. Like he wanted to be a one and done. He came to Gonzaga so he could have 1 year of development in order to get ready for like a really, really solid year to try and make a push for the NBA draft. And I think he's done a lot for himself on that front. His stroke looked a lot less methodical and a lot more natural, I think. And the shots that he took and kind of created for himself, he did them in a little bit of a different way than he did last year. I think last year he kind of relied a little bit. He would rely on his quickness in his first step, but then when he would get to the point where it was time to make a play, he was a little bit slow. I mean, not slow, but a little bit more patient and calculated and stuff. And it seemed like at Kraziness, he just freaking made the play, right? He came off a screen and gave a look to his defender to make sure he had enough space, and he would just pull up from a jump stop without really thinking through that calculus, right? So I think he recognizes that he's going to be a lot more relied upon this year to bring more consistent scoring, because it was really up and down last year. I mean, he'd have games where he dropped 15 plus points and then he'd drop 5. And I don't think that that's going to be a successful recipe this year with this young team.
Yeah, agreed. I think he'll have that mentality more this year. But like you said, I mean, he's really special to watch from a point guard perspective. You talked about his kind of presence on the court, and he's a killer, but he does it in such a patient, like he has such a calming presence on the court when you watch him. And I think a lot of that goes to his tempo that he plays at and the change in pace and tempo that he uses. You could watch him go off ball screens last year a million times, and the different looks and the different moments when he's passing the ball, whether he's passing it closer to the elbow, or if he'll get an extra dribble or head fake in and give it later and throw it back to Timmy or whoever's crashing down from the high post. And I think mixing that, his passing ability, which I think is pretty underrated for him. I mean, the dude's gone completely under the radar this whole entire offseason. It's like people have forgotten that he's coming back. And I think Gonzaga people know how special he is, and maybe underutilized last year because he didn't need to be used as much with the guards that we had in the experience. But I mean, the dude's a potential All-American, and people are talking about him like it's like, oh yeah, here's a guy who like he started a couple games for them, like he'll be all right. He's just really special to watch. I think he's gonna have a great season. I'm hoping that he has a great season, really steps up the way that we would expect it to. That transition to be the guy offensively. I know you have Timmy and Chet, but like as your primary ball handler, being the guy who can go to and get a bucket when you need to, especially late in game, that tends to be a guard. I think that's a tough transition sometimes for people, but he's done it a little bit at Florida. He's been the guy in big games, and I think he's ready to step into it. And like you said, he came here with a plan of sitting out 1 year and then playing this year. He got to play all of last year, go to a national championship game. And so I think he's just ready to go, ready to get some revenge and go win a championship. And hopefully pick up some personal awards on the way and get himself drafted.
Yep. No doubt. One last thing while we're on this particular question. I know that he only shot 32% for the season from 3 last year, but there was an 11-game stretch between Valentine's Day and the UCLA game in the tournament where he shot 39% from 3. He has all the ability in the world to be a super consistent high-level 3-point shooter for this team. He showed it a little bit last year. So
yeah, I mean, there was a point last year at the beginning of the year where him and Ayayi were both in the low teens percentage-wise from 3, and then obviously reverted to the mean pretty aggressively. So, I mean, the ability's there. It's finding that flow and rhythm within the offense with some new guys around. But I think being a guy who can be aggressive with his own shot selection this year, that should help him.
Yep, totally. And then the last question, I mean, will he play himself into the draft this year?
I definitely think he can. I think if he plays the way we're talking about it, which obviously easier said than done, but if he has that consistency and he's able to show that he can shoot, off the dribble, off the catch, the playmaking ability, the IQ is there. maybe there's questions around the athleticism, but I mean, he's not going to be getting drafted as, a franchise player. I think he's a guy who can go in and be a great role player for a team in the NBA and be a consistent point guard, consistent presence. Like we said, it's kind of calming presence on the court. Doesn't turn the ball over a lot, smart with the ball. So I definitely think he can. I think it'll be interesting to see if maybe he's not climbing up draft boards, even if he's playing well towards the end of the season, what his decision is, because he's technically, I mean, they list him as a senior. We know he has the extra year of eligibility. I have no clue what that would look like. I know historically we've seen those go more towards staying pro, whether, it's an IEI situation or just going to Europe. But I think he's going to have all the opportunity in the world to prove himself to be an NBA caliber player this year.
I mean, I think he will get drafted myself. I think that he'll be a late second rounder. I mean, if Nigel, averaged 17, 6, 4, and 2 steals a game. I mean, if he gets drafted, and he had such an amazing season, second team All-American. I mean, like, I think that just goes to show how difficult it is and like what kind of player you need to be in order to make that happen. At the same time, you got guys like Nico Mannion who end up, getting drafted and playing. So it really just kind of, I don't know. I think it depends on a lot of things. I think it's going to be more than just him scoring a million points or whatever. It's going to be more just like proving, does he have the skills to be a point guard at the NBA level? So
yeah, and obviously age is going to play a role in all this too. You're less likely to get drafted for teams to spend, their draft capital on you when you're 20, 21, 22. He'll be by the end of the year. So, I mean, that plays into it a little bit, but we've seen guys get drafted. Like I said, you're not drafting him to be a future star or a project. You're seeing, do you think that he can come in? I mean, it's kind of like a Jared Butler situation. Obviously, different styles, different games, but Jared Butler is not going to be an NBA superstar on a team, but he's going to be a guy who's smart. He's consistent. He takes care of the ball. He makes good winning plays, and he is just a good guy to have around in the locker room. So, if you can get an opportunity like that, even if you're not drafted necessarily, but which makes me lean to, I think he would for sure be gone no matter what after this year, just because having another year of age, you're not making it any more likely that you're going to get drafted.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Regardless, I'm excited to see how he does. And I hope that he's kind of talked about and moves up draft boards and things like that. If he's playing that well, I think that bodes really well for the team on the whole. So, all right. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Thank you all for listening. Go check out zagaholic.net. Carson, Dylan, and I are contributing to that website, and there's a lot of really good content coming out there. Also, big shout out to Cowan Jenkins for now being our official editor, the official editor of the Zag Talk podcast. So thank you, Cowan. Really, really appreciate you stepping up and helping us out here. Without further ado, we'll be probably releasing an episode every week from here on out throughout the rest of the season. So really looking forward to putting out some content for all of our amazing listeners. Feel free to follow us on Twitter at BeMaryZag and Carson.
At Carson Hollyoak, or at Zag Talk. I run both. More Gonzaga basketball on Zag Talk. A little more maybe Mariners baseball and investment stuff, and random Carson stream of consciousness on the other one.
Love it. All right, go Zags.
Go Zags.